Welcome back to Paranightmares, where the night whispers and we listen. If creepy tales and unsettling shadows are your kind of lullaby, you're in the right place. Before we descend into tonight's darkness, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. After you finish the video, let us know which part made your skin crawl most. I'm watching, and I read everyone. Permafrost Lodge stood as a solitary beacon in the vast, unforgiving expanse of interior Alaska. Its rough-hewn timbers and frosted windows a testament to human resilience against the bitter cold. Built generations ago on the edge of a retreating glacier, it was a popular spot for brave tourists and weary prospectors, offering warmth, a hot meal, and a bunk for the night. Locals spoke of the eternal cold that clung to the lodge, a chill that seemed to penetrate deeper than any winter wind. But the cold was not just atmospheric. It carried whispers, and those whispers promised a profound, terrifying sleep. When Sarah, a young glaciologist, arrived at Permafrost Lodge for a research expedition, she was drawn by the sheer isolation and the immense, silent power of the nearby ice. She dismissed the lodge owner's hushed warnings about listening to the ice as a local eccentricity. Yet, she quickly noticed the oppressive, bone-deep cold in her room, a chill that defied the roaring wood stove. And then came the whispers, faint, ethereal murmurs, seeming to emanate from the very walls, a chorus of distant, sorrowful sighs. Sarah also observed the lodge's other guests and residents. They were unusually quiet, often found staring blankly out at the snow-covered landscape, their movements slow, their eyes holding a strange, dreamy blankness. They seemed perpetually drowsy, falling into deep, unnaturally long sleeps from which they emerged disoriented, their personalities subtly muted. The lodge itself felt like it was holding its breath, a pervasive quiet broken only by the crackle of the fire and the low, constant hum of the whispers. Driven by a growing unease, Sarah investigated the lodge's history. She found fragmented journals left by the original builder, a desperate prospector who, facing starvation during a brutal winter, had stumbled upon a cavern beneath the glacier. Within it, he'd found not gold, but a vast, shimmering crystal formation, pulsing with an icy luminescence. He believed it was a benevolent spirit of the ice, a dream weaver that offered eternal sleep and peace. He built the lodge directly above it, a conduit for its calming, hypnotic influence. But the journal also hinted at a terrifying cost. The crystal didn't just offer sleep. It consumed consciousness, drawing the vividness of dreams and the spark of individuality into its icy depths, leaving behind only placid, dreamless husks. The whispers Sarah heard were not just residual energy. They were the collective, agonizing voices of those consumed by the dream weaver, trapped within the crystal's cold embrace, their consciousnesses yearning for release. The pervasive drowsiness was the crystal's insidious lure, its way of drawing new victims into its profound, eternal sleep. The muted personalities of the lodge guests were a chilling testament to the dream weaver's subtle feasting. One night, Sarah found herself uncontrollably drawn to the coldest corner of her room, where the whispers were loudest. She saw a faint, shimmering mist emanating from the floorboards, slowly coiling around her feet, its touch impossibly cold, its presence inducing an overwhelming, seductive drowsiness. From mist, she clearly heard a chorus of whispering voices. "Sleep, precious, join us, peace awaits." Her eyelids grew heavy, her thoughts foggy, and she felt an almost irresistible urge to surrender, to embrace the profound, eternal slumber. She remembered a desperate, scribbled note in the builder's journal. The dream weaver, though ancient, was sensitive to extreme, chaotic noise and the sudden, jarring shock of fire, which represented the antithesis of its icy existence. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate terror, Sarah grabbed a heavy ice axe from her expedition gear. With a guttural scream, she plunged the axe into the floorboards at the source of the mist, tearing into the wood. The whispers immediately intensified into a cacophony of enraged, high-pitched shrieks. The room convulsed. The mist solidified into writhing, spectral forms, reaching out with icy claws, their faces contorted in silent agony. She knew she had to expose the crystal. She struck again and again, tearing away the floorboards, revealing a gaping hole to the icy darkness beneath. From the depths, an unearthly, piercing wail erupted, a sound of ancient, thwarted hunger as the crystal was exposed. Then, remembering the fire, she grabbed a small, portable propane torch from her gear and blasted its roaring flame down into the hole. The effect was immediate and violent. The spectral forms recoiled, screaming, dissolving into steam. The crystal beneath pulsed with a furious, crimson light, then began to crack, sending fissures through the surrounding ice. The entire lodge shuddered, its timbers groaning, as the glacial foundation began to fracture. The intense heat of the torch, combined with the chaotic sound of the breaking ice, was shattering the dream weaver. Sarah fled Permafrost Lodge, the screams of breaking ice and dissolving spirits echoing behind her. She never looked back. The lodge collapsed into the glacial fissure that night, buried forever. She still feels the cold sometimes, a phantom chill that settles deep in her bones, and she lives with the haunting memory of the glacial whispers and the terrifying realization that some peace comes at the cost of one's very consciousness, and that not all dreams are meant to be eternal. The waters of the remote Alaskan inlet, near the old fishing village of Kuskokwim, were notoriously treacherous, known for their sudden, violent squalls and deep, frigid currents. But locals also spoke of a more insidious danger: the lost echoes, faint, phantom cries and songs that seemed to drift across the water on moonless nights. They said these were the sounds of an ancient village, swallowed whole by a rogue wave centuries ago, its people still calling out for help. But the echoes were not just residual grief. They were a siren song, pulling the unwary into the depths. When Liam, a marine biologist researching unusual whale migration patterns, anchored his research vessel in the secluded inlet, he was captivated by its stark beauty and the profound silence of the surrounding wilderness. He dismissed the fisherman's warnings about answering the echoes as superstitious nonsense. Yet he soon noticed the strange, almost hypnotic currents that pulled at his vessel, even on calm days. And then came the echoes, faint, ethereal cries, sometimes like children's laughter, sometimes like mournful chants, seeming to rise from beneath the waves, growing clearer on moonless nights. Liam found himself increasingly drawn to the echoes. He would spend hours on deck, listening, feeling a strange sense of longing and a profound, comforting sadness wash over him. He began to have vivid, unsettling dreams of being pulled into deep, dark water, surrounded by shadowy figures, their faces indistinct, their voices merging with the echoes. The vessel's crew, meanwhile, became unusually lethargic, prone to staring blankly out at the water, their movements slow and deliberate, their conversation muted. Driven by a growing unease, Liam researched the inlet's history. He found fragmented indigenous oral histories speaking of a water spirit, a powerful, ancient entity that resided in the depths, feeding on despair and sorrow. It had once demanded a tribute of voices from the coastal tribes, and when they refused, it had summoned a monstrous wave, swallowing their village whole. The lost echoes were not just the sounds of the drowned. They were the collective, agonizing voices of the consumed, trapped within the water spirit's frigid embrace, their sorrow fueling its existence. The hypnotic currents were the spirit's subtle lures, drawing vessels closer, pulling new victims into its silent depths. Liam realized the echoes weren't just residual. They were the water spirit's active, predatory calls, using the sorrow of the drowned to lure the living. The drowsiness and lethargy of his crew were signs of the spirit's influence, slowly draining their vitality, preparing them to join the chorus of lost echoes. The dreams were the spirit's attempts to pull them into its watery domain. One moonless night, the echoes were deafening, a cacophony of sorrow and longing, seemingly emanating from directly beneath his vessel. Liam felt an irresistible urge to jump into the water, to join the voices, to find the source of their profound sadness. He saw faint, shimmering forms moving in the water beneath the hull, their shapes indistinct, their arms reaching up, beckoning. He heard a chorus of voices, clear as day. "Join us, brother, peace and the deep stay with us." He remembered a cryptic warning in the indigenous lore. The water spirit, though ancient, abhorred loud, discordant noise, and the sudden, violent shattering of its watery domain, particularly by fire, which represented a force it could not absorb. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate terror, Liam grabbed a flare gun from his emergency kit. He screamed, a primal sound of defiance, struggling against a hypnotic pull. The echoes intensified into a furious, enraged wail, filling his mind with unbearable sorrow and fury. The spectral forms beneath the water thrashed violently, their movements becoming more defined, their faces contorted in silent agony. With a guttural cry, Liam fired the flare gun directly into the dark, churning water beside the vessel. The fiery projectile hissed as it hit the frigid surface, plunging into the depths. The effect was immediate and violent. The water convulsed, boiling and steaming, as if a monstrous, unseen entity was thrashing beneath the surface. A terrible, guttural roar erupted from the depths, a sound of ancient, thwarted hunger. The echoes shattered, replaced by a profound, echoing silence. Liam immediately pulled anchor and set sail, never looking back. The inlet remained silent, its waters still and cold, but now devoid of the insidious echoes. He lives with the haunting memory of the drowned voices and the terrifying realization that some beauty hides a consuming darkness, and that not all calls from the deep are meant to be answered. Tundra Outpost was a lonely, ramshackle cabin deep in the vast Alaskan wilderness, miles from any road or human settlement. It served as a vital, if rustic, shelter for trappers and prospectors. Its single, perpetually roaring hearth a beacon of warmth against the brutal cold. Locals told hushed tales of the hungry fire, claiming it never truly died, even when neglected. But the hunger was not for wood. It was for warmth, life, and presence, and it grew with every traveler it embraced. When Maria, a wildlife photographer seeking the untouched beauty of the Alaskan interior, found Tundra Outpost after a sudden blizzard, she was profoundly grateful for its welcoming warmth. She dismissed the trapper's ominous warnings about never leaving the fire alone as an old-timer superstition. Yet, she quickly noticed the oppressive, almost suffocating heat that permeated the cabin, even when the outdoor temperatures plummeted. And then came the whispers, faint, crackling murmurs, seeming to emanate from the roaring hearth itself, a chorus of faint, contented sighs. Maria also observed the subtle changes in herself. She felt a growing lethargy, a profound reluctance to leave the hearth's comforting glow. Her thoughts became hazy, her memories of the outside world fading, replaced by a strange, almost hypnotic contentment. She found herself staring blankly into the flames for hours, feeling a profound sense of belonging, an urge to simply stay. Driven by a nagging unease, Maria investigated the cabin's history. She found a series of rough-hewn carvings on the interior walls, detailing the tales of previous occupants. They spoke of a fire spirit, an ancient, primordial entity bound to the hearth, sustained by the heat of human life and presence. It offered warmth and comfort, but it slowly absorbed the vitality of those who lingered too long, feeding on their life force, turning them into contented, firebound husks. The hungry fire wasn't just a metaphor. It was a literal, consuming entity, its whispers the gentle purr of its slow feasting. Maria realized the whispers weren't just residual sounds. They were the fire spirit's active, predatory lullaby, using its warmth to draw victims deeper into its thrall. The lethargy and mental haziness she felt were signs of the spirit's influence, slowly draining her vitality, preparing her to join the ranks of its firebound sustenance. The constant heat wasn't just physical, it was the intense, consuming presence of the entity itself. One night, Maria awoke, not from cold, but from an overwhelming heat that pressed in on her, suffocating her. The hearth blazed with an unnatural intensity, casting dancing shadows that writhed and coiled like grasping tendrils. She saw faint, shimmering forms coalescing within the flames, their faces indistinct, their hands reaching out, beckoning. She heard a chorus of voices, clear as day, emanating from the roaring fire. "Stay with us, warm, forever, never leave." She felt an irresistible urge to simply walk into the flames, to embrace the eternal warmth. She remembered a crude drawing in one of the carvings, a circle of ice and snow, repelling the fire. The fire spirit, though ancient, abhorred the extreme cold, the very antithesis of its existence, and the sudden, violent dousing of its source. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate terror, Maria grabbed a heavy iron poker and began to frantically shovel snow from outside, throwing it onto the roaring hearth. The moment the snow hit the flames, a violent hiss erupted, and the fire momentarily recoiled, spitting black smoke. The whispers turned into an enraged, high-pitched shriek. The shimmering forms within the flames convulsed, twisting into agonizing grimaces. She continued, shoveling more and more snow, dousing the flames, fighting against the heat that scorched her skin. The fire spirit roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger. The cabin shook, the walls cracked, the overwhelming heat dissipated, replaced by a sudden, bone-chilling cold that seemed to suck the very air from her lungs. The flames sputtered, dying, until only embers remained. Maria fled Tundra Outpost, the lingering chill and the phantom echoes of dying screams clinging to her. She never looked back. The cabin, stripped of its enduring warmth, rapidly succumbed to the harsh elements, collapsing under the weight of the snow. She lives with the haunting memory of the hungry hearth and the terrifying realization that some comforts come at the cost of one's very life force, and that not all warmth is benevolent. Deep within a rarely visited valley in the Alaskan interior stood a unique, chilling sight, a vast forest of petrified trees, their forms frozen in stone, their ancient branches reaching towards a perpetually overcast sky. Locals called it the Silent Grove, claiming that no sound truly echoed within its confines, and that those who entered felt a profound sense of stillness, a heavy quiet that seemed to press in on them. But the silence was not natural, it was enforced, and it concealed a terrifying, active form of preservation. When Dr. Alex Mercer, a paleontologist specializing in ancient flora, led an expedition into the Silent Grove, he was fascinated by the unique preservation of the trees. He dismissed his local guides' hushed warnings about listening to the silence as tribal superstition. Yet, he quickly noticed the profound, almost suffocating quiet that permeated the grove, a silence so deep it made his ears ring. And then came the peculiar sensation, a feeling of being watched, of faint, almost imperceptible whispers that seemed to emanate from the very stone of the trees, a chorus of faint, trapped sighs. Alex also observed his team members. They became unusually quiet, their conversations fading, their movements becoming slow and deliberate. Their eyes often held a blank, distant stare, as if their thoughts were elsewhere, consumed by an unseen presence. They found themselves compelled to touch the petrified trees, tracing their forms with a strange, almost reverent fascination. Driven by a growing unease, Alex found ancient tribal legends, almost forgotten, that spoke of a powerful stone weaver, an elemental spirit bound to the valley. It had once been a benevolent guardian, transforming living things into stone to protect them from a devastating ancient blight. But over millennia, it had become corrupted, its protective instinct twisting into a predatory one. It now actively sought to preserve life by drawing living beings into its petrified embrace, slowly converting them to stone, siphoning their vitality and consciousness, leaving behind perfectly preserved, silent effigies. The trees weren't just petrified, they were vessels filled with countless trapped, living souls. Alex realized the whispers he heard were not just residual energy. They were the collective, agonizing voices of those consumed by the stone weaver, trapped within its rocky embrace, their consciousnesses slowly being converted to inert stone. The oppressive silence was the stone weaver's method of silencing its victims, of preparing them for the ultimate, eternal stillness. The compelled touch was the entity's way of initiating the slow, horrifying transformation. One afternoon, Alex found himself standing before a particularly large, ancient petrified tree. He felt an irresistible urge to press his hand against its rough surface. As he did, a faint, crystalline shimmer emanated from the tree, slowly coiling around his arm, its touch impossibly cold. He felt a profound numbness spreading through his fingers, a terrifying paralysis. From the stone, he heard a chorus of voices, clear as day, emanating from within. "Join us, quiet, forever become one." His skin felt increasingly stiff, his movements slowing, as if turning to stone. He remembered a cryptic symbol in the ancient lore, a glyph representing a shattering pickaxe and flowing water, signifying violent disruption and the dissolution of earth. The stone weaver, though ancient, abhorred sudden, chaotic force, particularly the forceful breaking of its physical form and the cleansing flow of water, which could erode its stony essence. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate terror, Alex managed to pull his hand away, the sensation of stone clinging to his skin. He grabbed a heavy pickaxe from his gear. With a guttural scream, he plunged the pickaxe into the base of the petrified tree before him. The stone shuddered, sending tremors through the ground. The whispers immediately intensified into an enraged, high-pitched shriek, a cacophony of agony and fury. The air filled with a fine, choking dust, and the surrounding petrified trees seemed to writhe, their ancient forms twisting as if in pain. He struck again and again, tearing into the solid stone. The stone weaver roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger. As he hacked deeper, he revealed a network of pulsing, crystal-like veins within the tree, glowing with a malevolent internal light. Then, remembering the water, he grabbed a large water bottle from his pack and poured its contents directly onto the pulsating veins. The effect was immediate and violent. The water hissed and steamed as it touched the crystal. The veins convulsed, then began to crack, sending fissures through the entire tree. The spectral forms within the stone shrieked, dissolving into dust. The entire grove shuddered, its ancient forms fracturing, collapsing into dust and debris. The terrifying silence shattered, replaced by the sounds of crumbling stone. Alex fled the silent grove, the echoing collapse and the phantom whispers clinging to him. He never looked back. The grove was reduced to a barren, stony wasteland. He lives with the haunting memory of the silent souls and the terrifying realization that some beauty comes at the cost of one's very existence, and that not all stillness is peaceful. The vast, desolate expanses of the Alaskan North Slope were known for their deceptive mirages, shimmering illusions that would dance on the horizon, promising water or land where there was none. But among the few hardened prospectors who dared to venture there, whispers circulated of a more insidious mirage, one that didn't just deceive the eyes, but stole the mind, twisting reality and pulling the unwary into an endless, shifting nightmare. They called it the Arctic Mirage, a landscape that shifted not with light, but with hunger. When Lena, a lone cartographer mapping uncharted territory, ventured into a particularly remote section of the North Slope, she was acutely aware of the vast, empty beauty of the landscape. She dismissed the distant hum she occasionally heard, a low, resonant drone that seemed to vibrate through the earth, as geophysical phenomena. Yet, she soon noticed the subtle, unnerving shifts in her surroundings. The tundra would subtly ripple, the distant mountains would waver, and the horizon would impossibly bend, creating surreal, disorienting vistas. Lena began to experience profound disorientation. Her sense of direction warped, her camp seemed to move, and her supplies would inexplicably shift location. She found herself having vivid, terrifying waking dreams, landscapes she'd never seen, impossible geological formations, and shadowy figures beckoning her deeper into the ever-changing terrain. She felt a growing, desperate loneliness, a profound longing for companionship, even as she knew she was utterly alone. Driven by a terrifying realization, Lena consulted old native legends and obscure journals from lost expeditions. They spoke of the Dream Eater, an ancient primordial entity that resided beneath the shifting sands and ice of the North Slope. It was a psychic predator, capable of generating powerful illusions and twisting reality itself, feeding on human consciousness, particularly the loneliness and fear born of isolation. It would create perfect, tantalizing mirages, lures that drew victims deeper into its influence, slowly consuming their minds until they became part of its endless, shifting nightmare, their consciousness absorbed into its vast, unholy illusion. Lena realized the shifting landscape wasn't just a mirage. It was the Dream Eater's active manifestation, its attempt to disorient and consume her mind. The hum she heard was the entity's low, hypnotic drone, inducing the waking dreams and the profound loneliness, preparing her for absorption. The lost expeditions weren't lost to the elements. They were lost to the Dream Eater, their minds now enslaved within its endless illusion. One desolate afternoon, Lena found herself trapped in an impossible landscape, an endless plain of shifting, luminous sand, stretching to a horizon that pulsed with iridescent light. She saw shimmering figures moving in the distance, their forms indistinct, their voices a cacophony of whispers, calling her name, promising respite. She felt an irresistible urge to run towards them, to surrender to the comforting illusion. The loneliness was crushing, overwhelming. She remembered a desperate detail from a fragmented legend. The Dream Eater, though vast, was vulnerable to a sudden, absolute rejection of its illusions, a violent assertion of pure, unadulterated reality, coupled with the specific, high-frequency sound that shattered its psychic hold. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate defiance, Lena pulled out her emergency flare gun, but instead of firing a flare, she pulled out a specialized distress whistle she carried, designed to emit an extremely high-frequency, piercing shriek. With a guttural scream, she aimed the whistle at the heart of the most vivid mirage she could perceive, an impossibly blue lake shimmering in the distance. She blew the whistle with all her might. The piercing shriek ripped through the air, tearing at the fabric of the illusion. The beautiful mirage shattered, dissolving into churning sand and ice. The shimmering figures in the distance convulsed, their forms twisting into agonizing grimaces, letting out silent, inhuman wails. The low hum of the Dream Eater intensified into a furious, deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath her. Lena continued to blast the whistle, its shriek a constant assault. The landscape convulsed, shifting violently, the ground tearing apart, revealing dark, pulsating fissures. The Dream Eater roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger, as its illusionary realm was violently torn apart. The air filled with a suffocating stench of ozone and raw psychic energy. Lena ran blindly through the chaos, never stopping, never looking back. The Arctic mirage dissolved behind her, replaced by the stark, brutal reality of the North Slope. She eventually found her way back to civilization, but she was forever changed. She lives with the haunting memory of the shifting sands and the terrifying realization that some landscapes are not just vast, but are living, consuming entities, and that true reality is sometimes the only weapon against an endless, beautiful eye. High in the remote Alaskan range, a colossal glacier, known locally as the Howling Glacier, dominated the landscape. Its surface was scarred with deep crevasses, and a constant, mournful wind seemed to weep through its icy valleys, carrying with it faint, echoing moans. Locals spoke of it as a place where memories freeze, claiming the ice somehow held the sorrow of lost climbers and prospectors, their final thoughts trapped in the ancient ice. But the memories were not just preserved, they were alive, demanding to be heard, demanding to be shared. When Mark, a seasoned mountain guide leading a high-altitude research team, set up camp near the Howling Glacier, he scoffed at the tales of frozen memories. He attributed the mournful wind to natural atmospheric phenomena. Yet he soon noticed the oppressive, almost suffocating cold that emanated from the glacier, a chill that seemed to penetrate deeper than any winter wind. And then came the whispers, faint, ethereal murmurs, seeming to emanate from the ice itself, a chorus of distant, sorrowful pleas. Mark also observed his team members. They became unusually withdrawn, prone to long periods of silent contemplation, their eyes distant, They began to experience vivid, disturbing nightmares of being lost in icy landscapes, hearing desperate pleas for help, and feeling an overwhelming sense of profound loss. They found themselves compelled to touch the glacier, pressing their hands against its icy surface, a strange longing in their eyes. Driven by a growing unease, Mark found a discarded journal from a previous expedition, its pages brittle with age. It spoke of a memory collector, an ancient elemental entity that resided within the glacier, feeding on human sorrow and regret. It would draw the dying thoughts and emotions of those lost in the mountains into the ice, preserving them in a conscious, agonizing state, forcing them to relive their final moments. The Howling Glacier wasn't just a geological formation. It was a vast, sentient repository of human grief, its whispers the collective agony of its countless victims. Mark realized the whispers he heard were not just residual energy. They were the memory collector's active, predatory calls, using the sorrow of the trapped to lure the living. The oppressive cold was the entity's presence, its insidious way of chilling emotions, preparing victims for absorption. The vivid nightmares were the shared agony of the trapped, their desperate attempts to communicate their plight. The compelled touch was the entity's way of initiating the horrifying transfer of memory and emotion. One night, Mark found himself standing at the edge of a deep crevasse, staring into its icy depths. The whispers were deafening, a cacophony of sorrow and terror, seeming to emanate from the shimmering blue ice walls. He saw faint, shimmering forms moving within the ice, their faces indistinct, their bodies writhing, trapped in an eternal, silent scream. He felt an irresistible urge to lean forward, to surrender to the overwhelming wave of shared grief, to become one with the frozen memories. He saw his own deepest regrets, his own lost loved ones, reflected in the icy depths, beckoning him. He remembered a desperate, scribbled note in the journal. The memory collector, though ancient, abhorred the sudden, violent shattering of its icy domain, particularly by extreme, rapid heat, which could melt its foundations and disrupt its cold preservation. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate terror, Mark pulled out his emergency signal flares. With a guttural scream, he ignited a flare and plunged it into the icy wall of the crevasse. The intense heat hissed against the ancient ice. The whispers immediately intensified into an enraged, high-pitched shriek, a cacophony of agony and fury. The shimmering forms within the ice convulsed, twisting into agonizing grimaces, dissolving into steam. He continued, igniting more flares, tossing them into the crevasse. The glacier roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger, as its icy prison was violently torn apart. Cracks spiderwebbed across the glacier's surface. The ice groaned and buckled, the air filled with a suffocating stench of ozone and raw psychic energy, as thousands of frozen memories were violently released. Mar fled the howling glacier, the echoing collapse and the phantom screams clinging to him. He never looked back. The glacier fractured further, sending massive chunks of ice crashing into the valley below. He lives with the haunting memory of the frozen memories and the terrifying realization that some landscapes are not just vast, but are living, consuming entities, and that not all cold is simply natural. The Bering Sea, a vast, often turbulent expanse off the coast of Alaska, was known for its rogue waves and sudden, blinding fogs. But among the seasoned mariners who plied its waters, whispers circulated of a more insidious phenomenon: the phantom light, a strange, pulsing luminescence that would appear in the dense fog, seemingly guiding lost ships, only to lead them to their doom. They said it was the light of dead ships, their crews still seeking a way home. But the light was not a guide. It was a lure, and it desired new companions. When Captain Alexei Volkov, a grizzled fishing boat captain, found his vessel enveloped in a sudden, impenetrable fog in a notoriously treacherous section of the Bering Sea, he relied on his radar and instincts. But then a faint, pulsing light appeared on the horizon, seemingly guiding him through the soup. He dismissed the crew's hushed warnings about following the phantom light as superstitious fear. Yet he soon noticed a strange, almost hypnotic pull the light exerted on his vessel, steadily drawing him deeper into the fog. Alexei began to experience vivid, unsettling waking dreams, visions of ancient sailing ships, their sails tattered, their decks teeming with shadowy figures, their faces indistinct, beckoning him closer. He heard faint, mournful sea shanties and the rhythmic creak of old timbers, seeming to emanate from the light itself. He felt a growing, profound weariness, a desire to simply surrender to the guiding glow, to find rest in its embrace. His crew, meanwhile, became increasingly disoriented, their movements sluggish, their eyes fixed on the pulsing light, their voices muted. Driven by a growing unease, Alexei consulted old, forgotten logs from lost ships, found in salvaged wrecks. They spoke of the fog lurker, an ancient, primordial entity that resided within the Bering Sea fogs, feeding on hope and despair. It would create a perfect, tantalizing light, a lure that drew ships deeper into its influence, consuming their crews' wills until they became part of its endless, spectral fleet, their consciousness absorbed into its vast, unholy illusion of salvation. The phantom light wasn't just a natural phenomenon. It was the fog lurker's active manifestation, its insidious way of trapping new victims. Alexei realized the light he saw wasn't just an illusion. It was the fog lurker's active, predatory beacon, using the hope of rescue to draw victims into its spectral embrace. The pervasive weariness and disorientation of his crew were signs of the entity's influence, slowly draining their vitality, preparing them to join the countless lost souls. The waking dreams were the entity's attempts to pull them into its ethereal fleet. One night, the phantom light pulsed directly ahead, impossibly bright within the dense fog, illuminating a spectral fleet of ancient ships, their ghostly forms surrounding his vessel. He saw faint, shimmering figures on their decks, their forms indistinct, their arms reaching out, beckoning. He heard a chorus of voices, clear as day, emanating from the light itself. "Come home, rest, join us forever." He felt an irresistible urge to cut the engines, to simply drift into the spectral embrace, to find eternal peace among the lost. He remembered a desperate, scribbled note in one of the logs. The fog lurker, though vast, was vulnerable to a sudden, absolute assertion of living will, a chaotic burst of sound that shattered its hypnotic hold, combined with a violent disruption of its watery domain, particularly by loud, concussive force. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate defiance, Alexei grabbed a powerful maritime signal cannon from his emergency locker. With a guttural scream, he aimed the cannon at the phantom light, fighting against the crushing drowsiness. The light immediately intensified into an enraged, blinding flash, trying to overwhelm his senses. The spectral fleet roared, a silent, inhuman scream of fury. He fired the cannon. The deafening roar ripped through the dense fog, tearing at the fabric of the illusion. The phantom light shattered, exploding into 1,000 fragments of agonizing light. The spectral fleet convulsed, their forms twisting into agonizing grimaces, dissolving into mist. The fog itself began to churn violently, dissipating under the force of the sound. The fog lurker roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger, as its ethereal realm was violently torn apart. The air filled with a suffocating stench of ozone and raw psychic energy. Alexei set a new course, blindly steering his vessel away from the dissipating fog. He never looked back. The Bering Sea was clear again, but he was forever changed. He lives with the haunting memory of the phantom light and the terrifying realization that some guides lead to ultimate despair, and that not all salvation comes in the form of a comforting glow. Starvation Ridge, a perilous mountain pass in the Alaskan interior, was infamous for its brutal winters and the numerous prospectors and trappers who had perished there, their bodies often buried by avalanches or simply consumed by the wilderness. Local legends spoke of a ghostly cache, hidden stashes of supplies and gold that would appear and disappear, seemingly guiding desperate travelers, but always leading them further into the dangerous, isolated terrain. They said it was the lure of the lost, their final, dying wishes still echoing. But the cache was not a gift. It was a hungry illusion, leading to a profound, eternal hunger. When survivalist Ethan, pushing himself to the limits of endurance, found himself stranded by a sudden blizzard on Starvation Ridge. He was desperate for shelter and supplies. Then a small, perfectly preserved wooden cache appeared on the horizon, seemingly out of nowhere, its contents promising salvation. He dismissed the chilling sensation of unseen eyes watching him as exhaustion. Yet, he quickly noticed the way the cache seemed to subtly shift location as he approached, always just out of reach, always leading him deeper into the desolate, snow-covered pass. Ethan began to experience profound hunger, not just for food, but for something intangible, a gnawing emptiness that intensified with every step. He had vivid, unsettling waking dreams, visions of gaunt, frozen figures, their faces contorted in silent screams, beckoning him towards the constantly shifting cache. He heard faint, mournful whispers, like the rustling of dry leaves, seeming to emanate from the cache itself, murmuring promises of endless sustenance and warmth. Driven by a terrifying realization, Ethan recalled old, forgotten native stories about the hunger spirit, a primordial entity bound to Starvation Ridge, feeding on desperation and the very essence of human vitality. It would manifest as a tantalizing ghostly cache, a mirage that drew victims deeper into its influence, consuming their will and their life force until they became part of its endless, hungry landscape, their consciousness absorbed into its vast, unholy illusion of abundance. The cache wasn't just a lure. It was the hunger spirit's active manifestation, its insidious way of trapping new victims. Ethan realized the cache he saw wasn't just an illusion. It was the hunger spirit's active, predatory beacon, using the promise of life to draw victims into its spectral embrace. The pervasive hunger and his waking dreams were signs of the entity's influence, slowly draining his vitality, preparing him to join the countless lost souls. The whispers were the entity's final, seductive lullaby, promising an end to all craving. One night, the ghostly cache appeared impossibly close, its contents shimmering with an inner light, promising an end to his agony. He saw faint, spectral figures huddled around it, their forms indistinct, their arms reaching out, beckoning. He heard a chorus of voices, clear as day, emanating from the cache itself. "Come eat, join us, never hunger again." He felt an irresistible urge to simply lie down, to surrender to the comforting illusion, to find eternal peace among the lost. His own body felt light, almost ethereal, as if his life force was already draining away. He remembered a desperate, scribbled note in one of the lost prospector's journals. The hunger spirit, though powerful, abhorred the pure, unadulterated act of defiance against its specific form of temptation, the deliberate and violent destruction of any source of true, living nourishment within its domain, coupled with the profound, unyielding will to survive. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate defiance, Ethan pulled out a small, emergency energy bar he had been saving, his last real sustenance. With a guttural scream, he crumpled the energy bar in his hand, then threw it with all his remaining strength directly at the shimmering ghostly cache, denying it any chance of consumption, destroying the very thing it sought to mimic. The act was a visceral rejection of its illusion. The cache reacted instantly. It pulsed with a furious, crimson light, then exploded into a shower of ice and dust. The spectral figures convulsed, their forms twisting into agonizing grimaces, letting out silent, inhuman wails. The whispers intensified into an enraged, deafening roar, shaking the very ground beneath him. Ethan then, despite his exhaustion, began to furiously dig into the snow with his bare hands, not for shelter, but for sheer, desperate defiance, asserting his will to survive, to live in the real, brutal world. The hunger spirit roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger, as its illusionary realm was violently torn apart. The air filled with a suffocating stench of ozone and raw psychic energy, as thousands of desperate, trapped souls were violently dispersed. Ethan eventually found his way back to civilization, barely alive, forever changed. He lives with the haunting memory of the ghostly cache and the terrifying realization that some promises of plenty lead to ultimate emptiness, and that true survival sometimes means destroying the very thing you crave. Nestled in a hidden valley of the remote Alaskan interior, far from any maps, lay the almost mythical Bone White Village. Legends whispered it was a settlement consumed by an eternal winter, its inhabitants frozen solid, their forms perfectly preserved in the snow and ice, like macabre statues. Locals spoke of the unbroken cold that lingered there, a chill that seemed to emanate from the very earth itself, and the faint, constant sound of wind chimes, even on the stillest days. But the cold was not just atmospheric, and the chimes were not just wind. They were a profound, active form of imprisonment. When Dr. Lena Petrova, a reclusive cryoarchaeologist obsessed with perfectly preserved ancient cultures, finally located the Bone White Village, she was ecstatic. She dismissed her grizzled pilot's frantic warnings about listening to the chimes as native superstition. Yet, she quickly noticed the profound, bone-deep cold that permeated the entire valley, a chill that defied her advanced gear. And then came the chimes, faint, ethereal tinkling sounds, seemingly emanating from the very air, a chorus of tiny, sorrowful melodies, rising and falling with an unseen breeze. Lena observed the frozen inhabitants. They were perfectly preserved, their clothes intact, their faces serene, almost lifelike, but their eyes, though open, held a chilling, distant blankness. She found herself compelled to touch them, tracing their frozen forms with a strange, almost reverent fascination. She began to feel a subtle numbness spreading through her own limbs, a profound lethargy, and a growing sense of detachment from the living world. Driven by a terrifying realization, Lena consulted old, fragmented tribal stories she carried, speaking of a frost weaver, an ancient elemental spirit bound to the valley. It had once been a benevolent guardian, transforming living things into ice to protect them from a devastating ancient plague. But over millennia, it had become corrupted, its protective instinct twisting into a predatory one. It now actively sought to preserve life by drawing living beings into its frozen embrace, slowly converting them to ice, siphoning their vitality and consciousness, leaving behind perfectly preserved, silent effigies. The frozen inhabitants weren't just dead, they were vessels, filled with countless trapped, living souls, their consciousnesses slowly being consumed by the creeping cold. The chimes were not just wind, they were the collective, agonizing cries of these trapped souls, forced to express their torment through an endless, mournful melody. Lena realized the chimes she heard were not just residual energy. They were the frost weaver's active, predatory lures, using the illusion of eternal peace to draw victims deeper into its icy thrall. The oppressive cold and the numbness she felt were signs of the entity's influence, slowly draining her vitality, preparing her for the ultimate, eternal stillness. The compelled touch was the entity's way of initiating the slow, horrifying transformation into a living statue. One evening, Lena found herself standing before a perfectly preserved frozen child, its face serene, its tiny hands outstretched. She felt an irresistible urge to press her hand against its icy cheek. As she did, a faint, crystalline shimmer emanated from the child, slowly coiling around her arm, its touch impossibly cold. She felt the numbness spreading, her muscles stiffening, as if turning to ice. From the frozen child, she heard a chorus of tiny, weeping voices, clear as day, emanating from within. "Join us, quiet, forever become one." Her skin felt increasingly stiff, her movements slowing, as if turning to ice. She remembered a desperate, scribbled note in one of the tribal scrolls. The Frost Weaver, though ancient, abhorred sudden, chaotic force, particularly the forceful breaking of its physical form, and the cleansing, volatile power of fire, which could melt its icy foundations and disrupt its cold preservation. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate terror, Lena managed to pull her hand away, the sensation of ice clinging to her skin. She grabbed a heavy, blunt rock. With a guttural scream, she plunged the rock into the chest of the frozen child. The ice shattered with a sickening, crystalline crack, sending fragments flying. The chimes immediately intensified into an enraged, high-pitched shriek, a cacophony of agony and fury. The shimmering forms within the ice convulsed, twisting into agonizing grimaces, dissolving into steam. She continued, smashing the frozen figures, one by one. The frost weaver roared, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger, as its icy prison was violently torn apart. Cracks spiderwebbed across the frozen ground. The ice groaned and buckled, the air filled with a suffocating stench of ozone and raw psychic energy, as thousands of frozen memories were violently released. Lena fled the bone-white village, the echoing collapse and the phantom screams clinging to her. She never looked back. The village was reduced to a chaotic mess of shattered ice and debris. She lives with the haunting memory of the bone-white figures and the terrifying realization that some stillness comes at the cost of one's very existence, and that not all cold is simply natural. Denali, North America's highest peak, was a place of unparalleled grandeur and chilling isolation. Its vast, ice-covered slopes and razor-sharp ridges were known to claim lives without mercy. But among the few elite mountaineers who dared its summit, whispers circulated of a more insidious danger: the Star Eater, a malevolent entity that resided in extreme altitude, feeding on human ambition and the very light of distant stars. They said it would lure climbers higher, promising boundless clarity, only to consume their minds and leave their bodies perfectly preserved, staring endlessly into the empty cosmos. But the clarity was a deception, and the stars concealed a profound, eternal void. When Liam, an obsessive, driven mountaineer, embarked on a solo ascent of Denali, he was fueled by a burning ambition to conquer the peak. He dismissed the local guide's hushed warnings about the empty sky as poetic metaphor. Yet he soon noticed the oppressive, almost dizzying clarity that permeated the extreme altitude, a profound sense of isolation that seemed to suck the very sound from the air. And then came the whispers, faint, ethereal murmurs, seeming to emanate from the cosmic void itself, a chorus of distant, seductive promises of ultimate understanding. Liam began to experience profound disorientation, his sense of self blurred, his memories of loved ones fading, replaced by an overwhelming sense of cosmic insignificance and a compelling urge to ascend higher, to merge with the endless, star-filled void. He found himself staring blankly into the night sky for hours, feeling a profound connection to the cold, distant stars, an urge to simply merge. Driven by a terrifying realization, Liam consulted fragments of long-lost expedition logs he had obsessively collected. They spoke of the Star Eater, an ancient, primordial entity that resided in the absolute vacuum of high altitude, feeding on human consciousness, particularly ambition and the very spark of sentience. It would create a perfect, tantalizing clarity, a lure that drew victims higher, consuming their minds until they became part of its endless, star-filled nightmare, their consciousness absorbed into its vast, unholy void. The empty sky wasn't just a metaphor. It was the Star Eater's active manifestation, its insidious way of trapping new victims. Liam realized the clarity he felt wasn't just a result of altitude. It was the Star Eater's active, predatory lure, using the promise of ultimate understanding to draw victims into its ethereal embrace. The fading memories and cosmic insignificance he felt were signs of the entity's influence, slowly draining his vitality, preparing him to join the countless lost souls. The whispers were the entity's final, seductive lullaby, promising an end to all earthly concerns. One night, Liam found himself standing at the very summit, the stars impossibly bright, seeming to fill his mind with an overwhelming, cold wisdom. He saw faint, shimmering figures moving among the stars, their forms indistinct, their arms reaching out, beckoning. He heard a chorus of voices, clear as day, emanating from the cosmic void itself. Ascend, merge, be one forever. He felt an irresistible urge to simply step off the summit, to surrender to the comforting embrace of the void, to find eternal peace among the stars. His own body felt light, almost incorporeal, as if his mind was already drifting away. He remembered a desperate, scribbled note in one of the earliest expedition logs. The Star Eater, though vast and ancient, was vulnerable to a sudden, absolute assertion of human defiance against the cosmic, a violent rejection of its emptiness, specifically through the creation of intense, localized heat and light, a sun in miniature, to disrupt its cold, dark dominion. Driven by a surge of pure, desperate defiance, Liam pulled out his emergency signal flare launcher, modified for sustained, intense heat. With a guttural scream, he aimed the launcher at the heart of the most brilliant constellation he could perceive, an act of sheer defiance against the consuming void. He fired the launcher, sending a brilliant, blinding flare into the empty sky. The intense, burning light ripped through the oppressive clarity, searing his eyes. The cosmic whispers immediately intensified into an enraged, high-pitched shriek, a cacophony of agony and fury. The shimmering figures among the stars convulsed, twisting into agonizing grimaces, dissolving into pure darkness. The vacuum of space itself seemed to shriek, a terrible, guttural sound of ancient, thwarted hunger, as its ethereal realm was violently torn apart. The air filled with a suffocating stench of ozone and raw psychic energy, as thousands of trapped consciousnesses were violently dispersed. Liam stumbled down from the summit, blinded and frostbitten, but alive. He never climbed again, forever changed. He lives with the haunting memory of the Star Eater and the terrifying realization that some heights offer not clarity, but consuming void, and that true conquest sometimes means rejecting the call of the cosmos itself.